Hey everyone, Mark Kwok here. Today I want to talk about something a little different. I want to talk about Shang Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, the movie. A review, if you will. I know it's a little different from reviewing an item or something like that, but look, I gotta talk about it. So I just watched this movie last night. I want to give you guys my thoughts, but I do want to split it into two things. The first is around kind of the significance of this movie, the meta stuff, like the representation and so on. And the second part is the actual movie itself and how I feel about the movie. Is it a good movie or not? So please stick around for that as well. Some context before that, I am actually a huge film TV fan. I was a theater minor in college. If I could throw away everything I have today and do some acting and directing and be successful with that, I would do that in a heartbeat. And also, I'm a fan of Marvel too, the MCU. Now, I'm not one of those Marvel zombies from way back that have read all the comic books, but I have seen all the Marvel movies. I don't know, there's like 22 or 23 of them, something like that. Shang Chi, however, is obviously a bit of a different beast altogether because it's more than just a Marvel movie. It's more than just a film for me. It's like, look at my face, right? Like there's something extra to this specific for me. And also I'm sure for anybody who's out there who's Asian, like there is that extra level of significance for you. So let's talk about some of those things. Number one, damn. I mean, we are finally here. Asian Americans are now part of, and a meaningful part of, the most popular franchise in movies today. I don't know, film franchise-wise, like, what's bigger than Marvel? I don't know. And there's a movie with 90+% Asian representation. I mean, this movie has mostly Asian people. It is pretty huge, and it doesn't seem almost real because it is a very global and American film in a lot of ways, and the vast majority of representation in there is Asian. Number two, this character is actually a fairly formidable Marvel main character. The fact is, I had some expectations that maybe this would be maybe a caricature, some kung fu master type of guy, and that's kind of what we're watching. But they didn't really screw it up. This guy has depth. There's a real character to him. He's someone that I could actually relate to. And he also has some legit superpowers. So I think this is an actual formidable Marvel superhero. Number three, it's tricky to sometimes get the balance of the Asian and the American thing. Asian Americans will tell you all over, it's an odd place to be because like, are you Asian? Are you American? Like, which one are you? Are you not part of either, really? And so they have to juggle that, and it's really easy for a film like this to go really Asian in one way and do the whole just the Asian stereotype stuff, or it could go really into too much in the American way where like you lose all the Asian identity stuff as well. This is a nice balance, and then there's like just subtle things in the film that I think are coming from a thoughtful place, and so I appreciate that. Number four, this one's extra for me, but this movie is located in a lot of the scenes in San Francisco. Man, I live in San Francisco. I'm an Asian American here. There is actually like kind of a rich Asian American culture somewhere. Like there's like a Chinatown here that's like quite a really known Chinatown. I mean, 80% of the scenes in that kind of San Francisco part of the film these are places I was at like a week ago. It's pretty amazing to see that. And so this was kind of an extra punch for me too. And lastly, I think one of the cool things is that this is not just a silo film. One of the things is that this is part of the Marvel universe, which means that Shang-Chi will probably be a part of other movies. I mean, we know this is part of the way they do things, the Avengers stuff. That's promising. The fact that the movie did pretty well means that it'll probably have a number two. So this is not the end, which I think is super promising. And I love that aspect as well. Now let's get into the film itself. Is it actually a good film? By the way, no spoilers here, so you can hear my thoughts on this. I'm gonna give you the pros and the cons of this movie. Now the truth is, all of the representation stuff, all of the stuff I just talked about, probably doesn't matter all that much if the film is garbage. Because then it won't get another chance. It will be looked at as kind of like the stain on this Marvel universe. So a lot riding on this, and the truth is, it's a good movie. I have some bias here, but overall, I do have critiques on Marvel too. Like, I don't think they make the greatest movies sometimes. And this one, I do think is in that kind of mid to upper echelon of Marvel. It's not quite Endgame or Iron Man 1, but it is quite a good film. Great news is if you're into Marvel, if you're into Kung Fu, if you're into action movies, like all of the above, this movie actually does it. Number two thing about this movie is that the choreography in terms of like martial arts and just like any of the action scenes, rock solid. And it's not just like cheesy stuff. I mean, we're talking, there are some breathtaking scenes, like some just raw fighting, some like very, very artful dance type of kung fu that I haven't really seen, and it looks so beautiful. Number 3, I think, you know, it's really easy for Marvel or any superhero movie to get the villain wrong, because it's just a bad force. They don't have a lot of, you know, you don't hear the backstory that well, or it's like, why are they doing what they're doing? This is a villain who I think is one of the best villains I've seen on Marvel. Tony Leung plays him, and I think I don't know, I think he's supposed to be the Mandarin, but he is just rock solid. The acting, the fact that you kind of delve deeper into his psyche, like the things that motivate him, get him to be in that place. I think there's way more depth to this character than most villains. There is an element of just rooting for the villain a little bit as well, and like hoping that they'll come back or something. So I think that part has been done beautifully. Number 4, I mean, CGI is part of all Marvel films, and I think generally Marvel does it quite well. This is a movie where the CGI is solid. I mean, there are some scenes, I want to get into this a little bit later, but like there are some scenes where it gets a little ridiculous, and like I'm not sure it's the greatest, like I have some critiques, and it's all CGI effectively, like some magical creature stuff. It just gets kind of wacky. But if the CGI is good enough, it doesn't actually tear you out of the film. It just, you get that there's a lot of CGI going, but you could still be in it because it looks at least somewhat realistic in the context of the movie. And lastly, I want to say that the characters are all pretty much likable. I mean, there's something that's redeemable in each one, and there are moments where you're gonna get annoyed by characters or whatever, but I do think they put enough thought and there's enough charm and charisma in all these characters and actors that it is, you know, a likable movie because all the people are likable in it. So obviously you can tell I like the film. I do have a couple cons to the film as well. The first is that it does get a little too fantastical towards the end, where you're not really looking at like, you know, choreographed fights anymore, but it's just like CGI and creatures and stuff. I'm not trying to spoil anything. Thank God the CGI is good, because this was just on the edge of tearing me apart from this, because it was just like too much going on. It was all this weirdness, and it just didn't really like seem so grounded. The second con I have is that it's really strong on this kung fu and Chinese history and all the stuff that you kind of have seen as part of Chinese lore in movies. You could look at that in 2 ways. The first way is awesome. They're showcasing Chinese history. They're showing the mass audience all the different traditions and various things that make the Asian experience, I guess. The second way you can look at that is these are tropes. These are things that are, you know, other. They're very Eastern and traditional, like, you know, the talk of dragons or talks of, I don't know, the spirits and the chi and like these sort of things. I think what I do know is that these are real parts of how a lot of Asians think. And this is part of the history, and this is how a lot of culture has been spread down over time. But if you lean too far into that, then it just becomes kind of like this other thing. And there's a lot riding on this movie to not be other. It's also supposed to be part of just what you experience day to day as an American, as a global citizen. And it's not this obscure thing that is around this Chinese, you know, Confucianism and stuff like that. The third thing is, I wish it was a little bit more tied to the Marvel universe. One thing about this film is that you'll notice that it doesn't really, there's like parts of it that are Marvel, but you could, if you just take a little bit of those parts out, it would be just a standalone movie. Now, some prefer that. Some want these movies to be its own thing and not so tied into the world but one thing about this movie is that it's so significant. I do kind of wish it was more integrated. That way, you're putting your weight, you know, Marvel and Disney is putting their weight behind Shang-Chi no matter what. Like, it's integrated, it's part of canon, it's quintessential for the whole storyline. Maybe that kind of would have been nice. So all in all, dude, this one hits hard for me. I mean, I told you, I'm into film and TV. Like, this movie makes me think that I can be in one of these films one day. Also, San Francisco. I mean, these guys are like my age. Like, it's me, right? Like in a nutshell. And that's why I need to talk about it on my YouTube channel, even though I mostly talk about, you know, vacuums and plants. So this is something that I did want to talk about with you guys. I'm glad it's a good movie just to boot, like regardless of any of the Asian American stuff. It's just a good Marvel movie. Again, mid to top tier Marvel. And I'm really, really glad that it had that Asian element, the San Francisco element, all these different things that I personally have a vested interest in. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight as to how I'm thinking about it as an Asian American watching this movie. Great movie, go and see it if you can. See it in the theaters if you can, you know, support the movie as well. Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you have any comments, please leave them down below. My name is Mark Kwok. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys on the next one.